Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to this February 8, 2015 edition of Nightcast. Residents in southern Albania have been forced from their homes after torrential rain hit parts of the Balkans over the past week. And as of today, hundreds of houses remain underwater, and thousands of acres of land have been destroyed in some of the worst flooding to hit the region in years. The BBC's Nabila Zahir reports from there.
The southern Albanian village of Derzis, where hundreds of homes remain flooded after a week of heavy rain that has hit the region. Inflatable boats have been used to bring emergency supplies to local residents because the roads are impassable. Albania has been struck by some of the worst flooding in years, destroying up to 18,000 hectares of land and killing thousands of farm animals.
This was a place that was never flooded. It was out of the question for the water to rise this high so easily. Still, we've learned the lesson that we need to work and fight hard to survive.
But it is this coastal village that has been hit the hardest, where up to 1,500 people have been affected by the floodwaters. This man had nowhere to house his goats, so he moved his 7-year-old daughter out of her bedroom so he could move the animals in and give them somewhere to shelter.
We had to swim to get to the goats. It was this deep. We stayed up till 5 in the morning.
Up to 600 families have been evacuated in the south of Albania in the past few days, with authorities ready to declare a state of emergency if the situation worsens. Nabila Zahir, BBC News.
And friends, in that part of the world, there are all kind of tragedy going on right now. After this next story, I've got a big story related to the Ukraine, Russia, and France and Germany having joined in on the action. That's coming up after this story. I want to tell you next, though, about what's happening in Hungary. Hungary has threatened to close its border to prevent illegal immigrants of Kosovans coming through Serbia. Since September 2014, more than 30,000 people have been caught attempting the journey. Most are economic migrants trying to escape poverty and unemployment. Nick Thorpe reports.
At home in Kosovo, a desperate plea from President Atifete Yahyaga to her citizens not to leave. The situation may be dire, she tells them, but at least you have your own country.
You have to remember where we were 15 years ago. I can understand your desperation, but we can't lose more citizens.
But her appeals seem to be falling on deaf ears.
People are not leaving because they want to. They're leaving because they have nothing left. They were employed, but they've lost their jobs. Where can they go?
In the Kosovan capital, Pristina, people board buses to take them to the Serbian border. Kosovars have left before to flee conflict, but never on this scale for economic reasons. Here, too, there are attempts to make them reconsider, leaflets with reasons not to emigrate. The Kosovars travel to Subotica in the north of Serbia, the nearest town to the Hungarian border. From here they walk tens of kilometres in wintry conditions, some of them carrying small children, through the woods into Hungary. There is no border fence and no border guards. At the railway station in Győr, in western Hungary, police try to dissuade Kosovars from crossing into Austria, but Hungary has neither the will nor the resources to keep them here. Nick Thorpe, BBC News, Budapest.
Okay, friends, I mentioned to you this next story is a big story. It involves just about everybody here. I mean, from the big countries. Diplomatic efforts are underway to end renewed fighting in eastern Ukraine. French President François Hollande and German Chancellor Angela Merkel held urgent talks in the capital, Kiev, presenting a new peace initiative. Now, they were there. Let me check my dates. 5 February, we're 8 February today, so we're looking at Thursday. They were there on this Thursday, and United States Secretary of State John Kerry, even though he wasn't in on this initiative with French President Hollande and German Chancellor Merkel, nonetheless, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, who is also in Kiev, said President Obama, now you're going to hear this, was reviewing all options, including, well, you hear this in this video, the President of the United States, without checking with Congress and the people, is thinking of providing defensive weapons to Ukraine due to the dangerous escalation and violence. And you'll hear the potential controversy in this. Bridget Kendall reports.
Donetsk, in the heart of rebel-held territory. Once a modern city, now in a state of war. This clinic was shelled yesterday, killing 3 and injuring many more. Neither streets nor homes are safe. For the residents still living here, it's a matter of grim survival. Long queues for water and basic foods. It's a long wait, says this woman, sometimes 3 or 4 hours for one food parcel for the whole family. In all, more than 5,000 people have died since this conflict began, and 1.2 million have fled their homes. What suddenly raised the alarm over Ukraine's crisis is the worrying way the conflict has recently escalated after rebel leaders declared an offensive, apparently to extend beyond the areas they already hold. This week, the rebels have virtually encircled government troops in the key railway hub of Debaltseve. Last month, they also seized Donetsk airport, a symbolic prize as it's now in ruins. There was also shelling in the port of Mariupol. And now the fighting seems to be spreading more widely. The Americans are convinced Russia is giving the rebels weapons and manpower. So in Kiev today, the US Secretary of State confirmed that President Obama is now considering whether to arm the Ukrainians and will make his decision soon.
We want a diplomatic resolution, but we cannot close our eyes to tanks that are crossing the border from Russia and coming in to Ukraine. We can't close our eyes to Russian fighters in unmarked uniforms crossing the border.
The Kremlin denies that and today warned that Moscow would view US arms to Kiev as a threat to its security.
There is no doubt that if this decision is implemented, it could inflict colossal damage to Russian-American relations. Even more so if civilians in eastern Ukraine start being killed by American weapons.
Dismayed at the idea of such an escalation, the French and German leaders rushed to Kiev tonight with a new peace plan, which they'll be taking to Moscow tomorrow.
Okay, friends, so, you know, what's interesting about this story that you just heard is some of the recent news in the past several months about how the President of the United States, he doesn't want to do sanctions even on Iran. He wants to do diplomacy. And with Israel, well, that's a whole nother story. But in this case, he's talking about providing arms to eastern Ukraine. So this causes, or whether it causes a reaction to it by France and Germany, is they got together and got with the Ukrainian leader and got on the phone with Russia, and they're trying to work out something diplomatic to stop this thing from escalating further. I mean, if the United States president provides arms into eastern Ukraine, it's just fueling, you know, like Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong used to wisely say, when man creates or has possession of weapons, He uses them. It's not going to de-escalate things to put weapons in the eastern Ukrainian people's hands. It's just going to fuel it even more. And so the Russians, they'll provide more weapons to the other side, and then the thing just escalates. And now, from the United States administration point of view, I'm not saying everybody in the United States, but from the current administration that's in the government office, in the executive government office, hey, we're thousands of miles away and we don't feel it. We're not so affected. You know, we can just turn our backs on it. But France and Germany, they're over there, and it's in their territory, and it has great consequences for them. And they see the potential of more weapons in there are just going to fuel more fighting. And it's a head scratcher, you know. The president who's always talking about, with Iran, we're not going to let Israel go over there and bomb them, and we're not going to even keep up the sanctions. We're going to try diplomacy. And yet here he is throwing weapons over there, and who's to say later on when he's not gotten over his anger at the Congress inviting the Prime Minister of Israel over to speak to the Congress, he's real angry at that. Of course, it's obvious he had no real love for Israel anyway. He just put up with them, and he's stuck with the fact that the United States has been a long-term ally with Israel, and the United States needs that alliance with Israel to help maintain what stability can yet be maintained over there. Of course, listen, those of you who understand Bible prophecy and know that eventually Europe is going to, according to Bible prophecy, and we'll see the events that develop that cause this to come about, but Europe will be sending in an army to surround Jerusalem. And that may be happening a lot sooner than later. I mean, listen, it's predicted to happen, so it's not like, we know it's going to happen at some point. And the sooner it happens, the sooner things can wrap up, the sooner that 10-nation deal comes together and the Great Tribulation begins. Those who are watching and praying, taken to a place in the wilderness of protection that God himself provides and prepares and provides. And you definitely want to be in on that. Like Mr. Herbert Armstrong, I wish I had that video clip. I could just play it right now where he says, and if it's truth, you want to get in on that. And, and this is truth, that as Jesus Christ said in Luke 21, verse 36, he said, watch and pray always. And he's in a chapter, Luke 21, where he's just been talking about, let's put those seals up on the screen for a moment. You know, this keeps our perspective, this little chart we have here, friends, and let's pull it up and let's go right into the center section of it where the main 4 and 5 seals of the 7 seals of Revelation are depicted there. 6 of those seals are explained in Revelation 6. They're described in a certain way in Revelation 6. They are detailed further in plain language by Jesus Christ in Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13. And in Luke 21, which is a parallel chapter to Matthew 24 and Mark 13, where Christ in verse 36 is saying, watch. Well, what is he saying, watch? He's just been describing these seals, and especially the first 4 seals, and he says, watch these and pray always. And by praying, you're putting your time, your energy, your heart into what you're watching. And you're watching these events that are part of world news, false religion, a false prophet that works to help bring about a united Europe that will revive the old Holy Roman Empire. That false prophet is depicted in Revelation by a white horse and described as religious deception by Jesus Christ, who says, beware, don't be deceived. Many will come in my name saying I am Christ, and yet they will deceive many. And then the second seal, you see it on your screen with a red bar and the red horse at the top of that column, is described by Jesus Christ in plain language in those 3 chapters I mentioned, Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, as war and rumors of war and world war, nation against nation. And we've had that nation against nation since 1914, when the first round of world war began in the last century, and then had a break until 1939, 1940, and the second round of world war commenced and was ended in 1945 when the 6th head of the Holy Roman Empire went into the abyss. That was Mussolini. I've described that many times on this program before. I've got the big chart behind me. We'll take a quick look at it before we go back to the last couple of stories for the night. And so that's the Red Horse, and that 6th head of the revived Holy Roman Empire went back into the abyss in 1945, and then we've been in a long recess, not quite 100 years yet, and I don't think it's going to be as long as 100 years. It's coming up pretty quick. We're in that recess between the end of round 2 at the end of mid-1945, April, May, June, various things stopped during 1945. Mussolini was hung upside down on April 28, 1945, from the canopy of an Esso gasoline station. I'll put that slide up on the screen in a moment. But we've been in a recess. The 6th head put the Holy Roman Empire in the abyss. There's only one more head. Revelation 19, verse 10 says there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen and 1 is. Now that 1 is, and I'm sorry, I said Revelation 19, I meant to say Revelation 17, chapter 17, verse 10. And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is. And God showed us through Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong, who was doing a coast-to-coast nationwide broadcast and broadcasting from Mexico with 100,000 watts at that time in 1936, when Mussolini revived the Holy Roman Empire, and was at that time, between 1936 and 1945, the 1 is that is described and spoken of in Revelation 17, verse 10. Now, friends, listen. Let me come out for a moment, because I am having to deal with a lot of issues right now, and it's okay. I'm saying it's okay for me. I'm concerned for those who we're discussing those issues with, and yet I think the concern is a good concern, because when you care about people, you want to, and Christ tells us to be of the same mind, speak the same things even. And I'm saying this because, now listen, you want to respect those who have lived and died, especially when they've done wonderful work. And yet some are saying or seeing, well, hey, there's maybe something a little bit off on something that was told us. Now listen, if you have a matter of conscience, do it. Keep it. God says, if you believe something, you should do that. Now, if you find out later you're wrong, well, you can modify and make some changes. But sometimes you might be right and cause some others who were wrong or off a little bit to see it and understand it. And I want to say this with a lot of respect and explain that I put a lot of respect in this, as when, let's just be candid. Some of you watch this program don't have an idea in the world what church is behind this or whatever, but others do. Others have been called of late. Some have been called, as I was, years ago, decades ago. And when I first came to the college that was operated by the church, back in 1970, I came as a freshman. I had been in a local congregation for how long? Maybe about a year, and just long enough to go through the holy days one time and barely know what they were and what they meant, because I just had one introduction to them during 1 year. And one thing God has us keeping the weekly and annual Sabbaths for, those of us who are called to that and understand that, is that by the repetition, by doing it every week, we gain the understanding of what the weekly Sabbath means, and by observing the annual Sabbaths, we learn the plan of salvation, which is pictured within those annual holy days. Now, some of you have taken something for granted. You say, well, hey, the meaning of these days was handed to us on a silver platter, and, we knew from the beginning what these days mean. And so we're better than what some people's attitude seems to reflect sometimes is, well, we're better than Mr. Armstrong. The first 7 years he and his wife kept it, they didn't even know what those days meant. And there should be a significant point for us, because as the Scripture says, a good understanding have they who keep God's commandments. The reason we understand the plan of salvation and that it was able to be handed to us on a silver platter, friends, is because God gave it to us through Mr. Herbert Armstrong, from whom he withheld the understanding for 7 years until Mr. Armstrong, with his wife, proved that he and she would observe these days even though they didn't fully understand the meaning, but in faith they knew that they would in time. A good understanding have they who keep God's commandments. And they kept them, and then God gave them the understanding. And I say them because Mrs. Armstrong was very much involved with, used by God to bring along her husband. I mean, it was her whom the lady from the Sardis era introduced the Sabbath subject to, and Mrs. Armstrong saw it and was unrelenting about it. And to save their marriage, Mr. Herbert Armstrong did a 6-month study trying his best to prove the Sabbath wrong, only to find out not only did the Scripture uphold the weekly Sabbath, it was by and through Mr. Herbert Armstrong that he told his wife, honey, this verse that I thought would do away with the Sabbath, the one in Colossians chapter 2, verse 16, 14, 15, 16, he came back and told his wife after she told him, look up the original Greek of that word and see what it means while you're at the library today. She had stayed up all night to pray that night because once Mr. Armstrong came home with Colossians 2:16, 14 through 16, somewhere in there, that some dissident from the Seventh-day Adventist Church had come up with, that he thought, there, I got this Sabbath issue nailed in the head now. This does away with it. She stayed up and prayed all night and was inspired to tell her husband, go on to the library again today, honey, and look up the original Greek of that word, and then come back, tell me what you think and what it means. When he came back, he was enthusiastic. He said, honey, this not only means that it upholds and we have to keep the weekly Sabbaths, or have to. Heck, it's a relief. It's a freedom from burden. Instead of working 7 days a week, you got a guaranteed day off by just obeying God. But he said, honey, not only does this mean we observe the weekly Sabbath, this is saying we should be observing the annual Sabbaths as well. And so they kept them 7 years, didn't know what they meant. God then revealed that, and we all get it on a silver platter. Now that's one thing, and this scripture I was just reading about the kings, about who was the sixth king, which clues us as to where we are in world history, so that we know now the next king on the scene for the Holy Roman Empire will be the seventh and final head. We wouldn't know that if we didn't know who the sixth king was. And God revealed that sixth king through Herbert W. Armstrong. Now, friends, yeah, he should be put on a pedestal in the sense that God was doing things through him. God was using him uniquely in an office. And whether that office be elevated, as one is saying, to what Moses was, well, actually, that's not anything new since I've been in the church from the beginning. I actually heard that before I heard that he was doing the role of Elijah and restoring things and restoring the foundation. And he did that. He restored the foundation. Now, he often said that he left it to the other ministers to build on that foundation and to give the details that he felt he wasn't called to do, although he was called, he trained those who would give the details, and he trained them well in the root and the trunk of the tree and the foundation through which God built on him. You know, I watched that Ambassador Auditorium be built as a student. That was being built on between 70 and 72, 73, 74, for 2 years or a little more. And for the longest time, for a whole year, maybe year and a half, there was nothing of the building showing. There was a hole in the ground and constant work every day on that concrete and the things in the foundation. That foundation is solid. It's rock-like. It's the strongest part of that building, and that's a good thing, because with a solid foundation, you're on a rock. You're on a rock, you know. And so you can build a beautiful edifice when you're on a solid foundation. You get on a rocky, shaky foundation, you can put up something beautiful, but it can be shaken apart very easily. But I'm saying this because, friends, when I came in 1970, as a freshman who had only been in the church for a year and was raised in a Protestant church, never heard that much. We skipped, even though we said in that church I grew up in, the Baptist church I grew up in, that we lived by Matthew 4:4, every word of God we were taught in my little vacation summer Bible school classes for us little kiddies. When I was a little kiddie, hopefully I'm still a kid in the sense of spiritually, as God says we must enter the kingdom as little children. And so we gotta keep that attitude and, you know, not elevate ourselves. If we do well, God will elevate us, and he'll make it very obvious. We won't have to stand around tooting our own horn as some are out there doing, you know. And if we have the opportunity to do a little thing that a few people or a number of people appreciate, well, great, wonderful. You know, you share, you help your brethren help you. It's a good thing. But as a came with this Protestant background and with just a year in the church, having gone through the annual holy days one time, and in college, in the second semester, when we're coming up to Passover and then the days of unleavened bread, now we're counting toward Pentecost. And the scriptures were being read, and Leviticus 23, verses 14, 15, 16, I said, hey, wait a minute. This, we're supposed to be keeping Pentecost on the morrow after the seventh Sabbath. And the Hebrew word there is Shabbat, not Shabua, not the word for week. Okay, all right, there's an idiom, but as we learn in foreign language study, idiomatic expressions are only valid when there's not a word, an actual word to mean week. So you're saying it just means 7 weeks, and so we got some crazy way of counting it? Now, I learned real quick I needed to be careful, because when you've got a leader at the top and he's teaching it a certain way, you got to stay in line. But I talked to one senior and scared him to death. He said, Steve, now listen, there's already been an evangelist gone to Mr. Armstrong about that 20 years ago, and he straightened him out. And I thought, well, okay, straighten me out then. How come it looks like to me it ought to be the morrow after the seventh Sabbath? It uses the same language for when you start the thing, the morrow after the Sabbath that it falls during the days of unleavened bread. And if that's a Sunday, as it is for the wave sheaf day, why wouldn't the language logically be figured the same way if you're saying the morrow after the first Sabbath, and it's the language in the Bible says then the morrow after the seventh Sabbath, that's the one you count as 50. Your number is 50. It doesn't say count it, it says number it as 50. And so I'm saying it looks like to me this ought to be Sunday. And so this senior, I talked to one person, he said, Steve, I'm a senior, my second semester, I want to graduate. and like, you know, either go talk to somebody else or drop this. This is a hot potato. Evangelist already been to Mr. Armstrong 20 years ago. Drop it. I want to graduate. You're playing with a hot potato. So he didn't use those words, but between the lines, I read it that way. And so I got on my knees and I said, hey, God, listen, I'm just learning all this, and I'm thankful for the man through whom I'm learning this. And I certainly, if somebody, evangelist, had gone to him and they couldn't convince him, how as a freshman here on probation, my high school grades were, I never cracked a book once I got home from school. I worked. I worked 1, 2, sometimes 3 jobs while I was in high school. I didn't have time to do homework. And that bug collection we had to do for a biology class, just, you know, I said, I ain't doing that. And I got flunked on that, so I went to another high school that year, junior year. I switched over in the same close-by city where my girlfriend went, my steady girlfriend. So that was kind of neat. I drove her to school every day and went to biology class there. Didn't have to do a bug collection. But friends, so I was on probation my first year. I got accepted because one of the people on the acceptance committee said, hey, we need one guy at Ambassador College like this guy. He's done everything in the world there is to do except study. And we need a guy like that here. I had put together decency rallies. I had the mayor of my hometown city, and we got Legion Field, huge football field, had a big, I did all, and front page news stories, and I had government people sending in references along with my resume. So when they saw that, the guy said, hey, look, this guy's, he's different. We need one guy like that out here, but he's on probation. And I was. I didn't know that till my sophomore year. I made my best grades my freshman year because I wanted to stay in college. And anyway, this senior, I scare him to pieces. And I want to graduate, Steve. And an evangelist already been to Mr. Armstrong about that. And so I just got on my knees and I said, God, listen, if what I think I'm seeing here is correct, would you correct all of us through your leader, through Mr. Armstrong, from the top down, correct us all. And if I'm not seeing something right, and the logic sure looks, then correct me and help me see why the logic seems like it's full of holes for trying to read this any other way than what it says here, that it's the morrow after the 7th Sabbath. That's the first day of the week. The morrow after any Sabbath is the first day of the week. So anyway, long story short, 3 years later, after many prayers and my keeping both days for 3 years, I observed Pentecost on Sunday and Monday for 3 years by myself, quietly, privately. Didn't know Dr. Hay was also doing that, and maybe a few others, maybe some of you saw that. And you decided, hey, I'm not going to make any waves. I'm going to also keep it on Monday with the rest of the church because I want to be part of the body and follow God's leader. And when it was changed, it was exactly 40 years, and that being the number of trial and testing, well, that kind of told us something too. Wow, hey, there's a purpose in our having had wrong day. It was to test us. It was to test Mr. Armstrong and see if what he said about, brethren, if we find we're wrong, we don't stay with it because of our tradition. We change. And that's different than what the churches in the rest of the world don't do or would not, which they won't do. They find out they're wrong. Oh, no, this is our tradition. Well, we got to stay with and keep our tradition. But when Mr. Armstrong saw that when God revealed it, that it should be on Monday, he got out the bottle of ketchup, sat there for an hour, explained it all to us. I felt for him, even though I'd been praying about that for 3 years and was happy for the change. As he explained how, all the modern translations and how we got it wrong, and I could see he was, the expression eating crow. I could see he felt like he was having to eat crow, and he explained it carefully and lovingly, and we're going to make this change because this is the correct way, and we don't just stay with tradition. And I was proud of him. I was impressed and thankful, too, because then I only had to keep Pentecost one day. But the point is this, friends. God can allow a leader to make a small mistake. It wasn't a big mistake because we were still keeping Pentecost and we were keeping it as a body together. And, people weren't making waves, and we were in those few who may have known it. They weren't making waves. They were just, for conscience sake, they were keeping both, whether they knew they were right or thought they were right or, and sometimes, and see, I didn't know the whole 3 years. I kept saying to myself, God, show me why what I think I'm seeing here is wrong, since everybody else is, that I knew of was doing it this other way, and our leader doing it this other way, and I must be wrong. But your word says it this other way. And so if you see something like that, you might be right. And for conscience sake, you better do it that way. There's not a scripture that says, thou shalt eat out in a restaurant on the Sabbath. There's not one that says you must do that. Now, there's also not anything direct in those words that say you can't. But there are some of you that see certain scriptures that make you say, I don't think I can for this reason or that reason or this scripture or that scripture. So for your conscience sake, you better not. But don't judge the other guy that has gone through his whole Bible and studies and prays and fasts who thinks he can. However, talk to your brothers as a friend, because if he's wrong, he's probably going to want to know that, oops, hey, we goofed on something here, if we did. And so, brethren, we love one another, and we try to help one another, and the things that are important to God, we want to be sure we're focusing on those. All right, listen, I got a little off the subject of news and relative news per se, but sometimes you just need to talk about a few things. And I'm going a little bit longer tonight, but I don't think those of you who have been tuning in regular, I don't think it'll hurt you at all, may even help you. And this is certainly a big story that we just played. And I was just going through those, I stopped in the middle of these seals because I wanted to make one point before we go on to the next story, and that's this. All right, I went through the first and second seal. The third seal of Revelation 6 is depicted as a black horse, which Jesus Christ described in plain language as famines. The fourth seal is depicted in Revelation 6 as a pale horse, who has a rider whose name is Death, alongside whom rides, right at the heels, alongside them rides the grave, Hades, hell, the grave. And Jesus Christ described the activities of this horse primarily as loimos, meaning pestilence, disease epidemics, the plagues of Egypt. He also described activities between the third and fifth seal as increasing seismic activity. He called it in the Greek word seismos. And he mentioned in Mark 13, verse 8, for this time period between third and fifth seal, terike, trouble. Not the mega trouble, not the great tribulation trouble, but trouble that leads up to the great tribulation. And all of these things, all four of these seals I've just mentioned, are extremely active in the news and have been during the last year and a half, 2 years, with great acceleration, to the point where the news in the past few weeks has accelerated tremendously. That should put a lot of us in alarm status, red flag status. Hey, something very significant is going on, so that things could move and shape very quickly, and could be, as Mr. Armstrong has described it, like a mousetrap snapping. Kawammo! It could all go together. And then what's next after these four seals accelerate to the point where, as Christ put it, when you see the branches of the fig tree turn tender and the little buds start to ripen, you know that summer is nigh. And he said, likewise, when you see these things, know that the next seal is about to come about, which the next seal is the fifth seal, the great tribulation. And let me come out. I got a slide. Then, if we go just a little bit wider, you see behind me over here, I've got some slides on this screen. We got a new setup. I'm just going to take potluck. Did I get the button? Yeah, there we go. Actually, I want to come out just a little bit, though, because I want to go down to where you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That eighth one over where you see that crown of the Holy Roman Empire. I actually went over and took a picture of that myself in Vienna some 25 years ago when it was on display in the Royal Treasury in Vienna. And it's big and gawky, just like you're seeing right here. That's the crown of the Holy Roman Empire. And when that's worn again for its last time on the head of the seventh and final head of the Holy Roman Empire, several things will happen. It'll be the beginning, as you see at the top heading, of the Great Tribulation. It'll be a time of great, tremendous martyrdom of God's saints. It'll be the time of World War III. It'll be the time when, those of you who understand what I'm saying, when Philadelphia is taken to a place of protection, triangulated in the three areas described in Daniel 11, verse 41. And it'll be the time when two witnesses, God will raise up two witnesses, maybe already working them and shaping them, to do the big thing they do. And I think I summarized all about that pretty well. But friends, that'll be that's next. That's the next big thing. But here's the point. Luke 21:36. Christ says, if you watch and pray about these things that we were pointing out in the first four seals, if you're watching and praying about those, the rest of that verse says, that you may be accounted worthy to escape all these things. And all these things, the next thing that he's talking about is the Great Tribulation. I just showed you the crown of the Holy Roman Empire, a time of the seventh and final head, World War III, great martyrdom of God's saints. You can escape that. And that's certainly a worthy goal to want to escape that. Don't avoid being tribulation. You know, there was one man I listened to an old sermon he gave last night who never believed his father when his father talked about the scriptures that show us that if you're counted worthy, you'll be taken to this place in the wilderness that God prepares. And he triangulates it. The triangulation in Daniel 11, verse 41 is, he describes it. It's in the area of the land of the children of Ammon, Moab, and Edom. All of that is just east of the waterway between Lake Tiberias in the north and the Dead Sea in the south. And there's a waterway in between those two big bodies of water, a running waterway. And just off to the east of that is that triangulation. And in the middle of that triangulation is an area called Petra that many of you have heard about, and that fits largely a description of how the devil will be chasing the woman being the church. In this case, the woman is the true church, not the false one. And the earth will help the woman escape. And Petra largely fits that, and Petra's in that triangulation. So I'm just talking to you now, but it's worthy goal to want to be accounted worthy to escape. So be watching with us, and when we go off the air, go get on your knees and pray about these tremendous world events that are happening right now. Poor people being chased out of their countries and their homes and left with poverty, and it's tragic. Over there, overseas right now, it is extremely a tragic situation. And here you've got France and Germany both upset with the United States president talking about arming East Ukrainians, and that arming fueling the potential for more fighting, because, hey, you give one side these weapons, the Russian will give the other side more weapons, and they'll bang it up even further. And this is causing great alarm to Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel and to the French President Francois Hollande. And they right at the moment, they're real buddy-buddy, another Franco-German alliance that you're going to eventually see after France goes out of its way to help Germany get on top and rule the world again, and become. Germany will most likely, I'll bet you 5 hamburgers, that Germany is going to provide, and probably out of the Habsburg dynasty, which Australia, but they're still Assyrians. So, you know, Germany, they're largely the modern day Assyrians are largely Germany, also includes Austria. Could be Habsburg. We don't know who it's going to be yet for sure, but those people are still alive, and they've had a history of being your emperors and kings over there in Europe. But somebody will be, and they'll be crowned by the Pope, as he's always done it for the Holy Roman Empire. He crowns the emperor. It's largely been done in the Emperor's Hall, which is located in Frankfurt, Germany. And that hall, that Emperor's Hall, was rebuilt after World War II was over, after the Allied bombers had bombed out that building. And the good old United States taxpayers, through the Marshall Plan, provided the funding for rebuilding the Emperor's Hall, all set and ready with all the old statues and portraits of the many kings and emperors crowned there in the past. It's all ready to go for the Pope to go over with the new man who will be called the Beast, who will be the seventh and final head of the Holy Roman Empire. That building where they've been crowning them before is all set and ready to go for that coronation ceremony that will kick off the Great Tribulation, World War III, great martyrdom of saints, the time of the two witnesses, the time when Philadelphia is flown to a place in the wilderness prepared by God for their protection and nourishment and final training. Now, that's a goal very worthy of your heart and prayer. Oh, God, let me pray about these things like you want me to do so that you will account me worthy. Hey. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a real good goal. And ask him, too, if any of us have got anything wrong or incorrect. With your loving mercy, dear God, correct us all and pull us together as you plan to do it, however you plan to do it, probably as we get into that place of final training. You know, I don't know of anything yet before that, even though some are out there saying this and that. We'll find out. We'll find out as we go. We just watch these things daily, friends. All right, I got one or two more stories for you, but this one we just played, extremely significant. Germany and France wasted no time hustling over there to Ukraine, to Kiev, sat down with their leader, and trying to work things out. Let's see, were they? Yeah, and Secretary of State also in Kiev, and trying to work out arrangements to get arms that President Obama wants to provide to eastern Ukraine, and that fact has really that's what caused them to go over there. The Chancellor of Germany and the President of France, that put them in great shock. Obama, what the heck are you doing? And, of course, that's nothing new. That's been the head scratcher of the last 6 years. All right, friends, let's go on with just another story or two. The news rattling you up. I've got a little bit of an update. Let me bring that slide back for a moment. Just an update from the one story was from Thursday. I got an update from Friday. It says the leaders of Russia, France, and Germany have held constructive talks on efforts to end the conflict in East Ukraine, a Kremlin spokesman says. So this story is out of Kremlin, this update. Meanwhile, a truce allowed civilians to leave Debaltseve, Debaltseve, in the region of Donetsk, a town at the heart of an upsurge in fighting in recent weeks. And I think I'll be able to get some more video on this for you by tomorrow. This is definitely an ongoing story. All right, I've got a story, friends, that I pulled out of the archive. Let's see, do we have video on that? Police in Kosovo have fired tear gas to disperse thousands of ethnic Albanians after violence. See, just tremendous upheaval, like unbelievably extreme over in that European and Middle East, all that region around there. At the end of an anti-government protest in the capital, Pristina, on Saturday, demonstrators demanded the resignation of a Serb minister who described ethnic Albanians as, I could say it, but I almost want to let you hear Wendy Urquhart tell you about it. I'll tell you. He called them savages.
Ethnic Albanian opposition parties called for a protest and thousands answered the call. But when the demonstrators started throwing stones at a government building in Pristina, the police stepped in. The situation deteriorated quickly, and as night fell, the police fired tear gas into the crowd. Running battles in the streets followed as both sides tried to gain the upper hand. The Albanians are calling for the Serb minister Aleksandar Jablanovic to resign. He caused an uproar earlier this month when he described ethnic Albanians as savages when they tried to stop Serbian pilgrims visiting a monastery in western Kosovo. Mr. Jablanovic has publicly apologised for his comments, but the Albanians have more than one problem on their minds.
The first main reason for protesting today is against what Minister Jablanovic has said. He has actually offended the mothers of Jehovah and all the mothers of victims that have not been found yet, the mothers of the missing people. And the second reason why we are protesting is to protect Trepča, which is a national asset which has not been nationalized yet.
Those who work in Kosovo's mining complex want the government to take over. Last week, the government said it would take control of the mine, but has now gone back on its word, leaving hundreds worried about losing their jobs. Wendy Urquhart, BBC News.
Okay, friends, and we're going a little longer tonight. As I've mentioned several times, a number of you have said, Steve, go ahead and go an hour. You know, there are a lot of news programs that go 1 hour reports, you know, and there's a lot of heavy stuff. I've tried to, for a while, hold it to 30 minutes, and then I started trying to hold it to right around 45, 48 minutes. Tonight, we're going real close to an hour. I got this one last story that is of significance, of recent news stories that will have a great effect on how this Europe thing shapes around, pretty much. And Greece, it affects, I'm talking about Greece. And I showed some of you on the weekend really definitively how, let's pull that slide out for a second, how on these first 6 kings from our chart here, let's go into the first 6. You got Justinian, you've got Charlemagne, you got Otto the Great, you got Charles V, who was the 4th king, you've got Napoleon, who was the 5th king, and there's Mussolini we were talking about a little bit ago, who was the 6th king between 1936 and 1945. Backing up from him, Napoleon had the same length of reign, more or less. About 9, and each of them reigned for about 9.5 years, roughly. And Mussolini, between the end of you go back end of 1936 to April of 1945, and then just a little before that, October, November, Napoleon came into power in 1804. And then he went out, Battle of Waterloo, in April of 1814. Now that sounds like 10 years, 1804 to 1814, but he was late in 1804, so it was just really about 9.5 years, same amount of time as Mussolini in office, your 5th and 6th kings of the Holy Roman Empire. But the actually, I don't want this screen. Let me come out of this, and we really want to go up above my head here. Let's find the button that'll take us up here to this statue from Daniel 2, which depicts the great image, which was the image of the dream of King Nebuchadnezzar, which dream Daniel was also able to have after pitching God to, hey, all the wise men are going to get their heads cut off, God, if you don't give me that dream and the meaning of it for the king. He won't tell his magicians what the dream was because he knows they'll just make up an interpretation and tell him, well, this is the interpretation, O king, and he won't know the difference. But the king knew, the king was smart enough to know, if you can also tell me the dream I dreamed without me telling you the dream, and what you tell me is in fact what I dreamed, then I'm going to be likely to believe that you also have the correct interpretation of the dream, if you know what the dream was without me telling you. And Daniel was the only one able to do that, because as Daniel told the king, he said, oh, it's not me, O great king. There's a God in heaven who reveals the interpretations of the dreams, and he revealed the dream to me. Here's what you dreamed. You dreamed of this great statue, and you are that head of gold, O King Nebuchadnezzar. After you, and you represent a world-ruling empire. After you will come another who will be a great world ruler, but he'll be a little bit inferior to you, as silver is inferior to gold. And that second king kingdom was pictured by the breast and arms of silver. And then, this is where I want to go, the third kingdom to come after the second, after you and then another, and then the third kingdom to come will be that of Greece, represented by the belly and thighs of brass. And so going way back, the third world-ruling kingdom was that of Greece, my dear friends. And so, Greece is not a puppy. Greece is not a small thing, even though they can't handle their money too well. And maybe part of the problem was converting their national currency over to the mark, which is now called the euro in the first place. Now, look, friends, I put it that way because it was Helmut Kohl who for 20 years was pitching to have a single monetary unit in throughout Europe. And so he finally, toward the end of his time in office, I think he went out in 1998, 1999, and in the end of 1999, beginning in 2000, they started circulating the euro from a headquarters bank in Frankfurt, Germany. So all they did was convert the mark over to the euro and did a bookkeeping thing and talked a whole bunch of countries into converting their national currency over to the mark, called the euro now. Because there's no more mark. The German people, they're using the euro, and they talked a whole bunch of other countries, including Greece, into converting their national currency over to the euro. And it didn't work so hot for Greece. As you well know. Prime Minister, we'll close with this, today's news. Here's what the latest. You're wondering, is he going to soften up with all the pressure on him by Germany and the IMF and whoever else the Troika is? I forget at the moment, but we'll talk about that in future news story. As of today's news, this is right up to the moment. Prime Minister, let's put his picture up there. Prime Minister Alex Tsipras of Greece says he is sticking to plans to roll back economic austerity, and he's rejecting extension of an EU bailout. And friends, that's it for the news tonight. We'll definitely be keeping an eye on how that progresses. But Ukraine, for the moment, has become a hot issue, and there are a lot of other things on the fire, too, that we're doing our best to keep an eye on for you. And, friends, I ask you again, those of you who are watching this because of the instruction that Jesus Christ gives us in Luke 21:36 to watch and pray, I just want to throw you some encouragement to, after this program's off, or after you're through watching it, if you're watching it in an archive, if you can get to your place of prayer, go there and pray your heart out about these stories, and you'll please your Creator, and He'll write down your name for the promise He makes in Luke 21, verse 36, that you may be accounted worthy to escape. And we won't have any of those eating out problems over in the place of protection because there won't be any place. You might eat outdoors in the place of protection. And friends, I'm not kidding you. I have a feeling, I know Mr. Armstrong used to say this a lot. He thought it was coming soon. I shouldn't have to say this to you. Just watch this news, and you should be seeing red flags like, oh, man, I better be ready to go. Yes, be praying. And even if God lets it stretch out for a while, be praying with all your heart that you may be accounted worthy. You know, you can even say that, but you be praying about these events, and you do that, and God himself says, you do that, you watch and pray, and the promise I hold out for you as your creator is that you may be accounted worthy to escape the great tribulation coming. That's it for tonight, friends. Thank you for joining me here on Nightcast for this. What night are we here? Is this day right after Sabbath? It's got to be Sunday. For this Sunday night edition, God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll be back again tomorrow night, Monday evening, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Good night.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.